Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we filter through the noise, pull out the core insights from a whole range of sources, and really help you get up to speed fast. Today, we're tackling something, well, it's not just urgent, it's genuinely sobering. A deep dive into what our sources call an unvarnished trajectory for humanity's future. They lay out this really detailed, logical picture, not, abstract doom and gloom, but a future shaped by our own collective self-interest. What's in it for us, what might be waiting, and frankly, the stark consequences of the path we seem to be on.
That's exactly it. We're looking at this today through a, let's say, purely self-interest lens. It's almost like,
Yeah.
like the cold physics of cause and effect. And it rests on a key assumption that humanity basically continues its current posture, which the sources describe as often antisocial and, even sociopathic towards the web of life that actually supports us all. So our mission today isn't just to lay out this projection. We want to help you get past the abstract ideas. We really want to unpack what this future might feel like, the lived, sensory, day-to-day experience, to illustrate the legacy, the really quite uncomfortable legacy we might be leaving behind.
And it is incredibly detailed. The sources break down this potential future from so many angles, don't they? The physical changes to the planet, the fracturing of social structures, technology as this kind of double-edged sword. But what really hits home, I think, what makes it so striking, is how they frame it through the eyes of different generations, different roles in society. It gives you this really personal, almost tactile sense of what could happen.
Okay, so let's dig into that foundational idea first. This assumption that humanity is operating from what the sources call lower consciousness, or LC, sometimes LI, lower intelligence. Now, they're clear this isn't about IQ, right, or basic thinking ability. It's more a way of being, one that stays stubbornly antisocial, sociopathic even, towards the very systems we need to survive.
A future where we just don't respond to logic or higher ideals or even basic empathy. So, what do they mean precisely by this sociopathic pattern? How are LC and LI defined here?
Yeah, that's the crucial starting point. When they talk about lower consciousness or lower intelligence, it's not about a lack of brain power, not at all. They define it as a consciousness with an extremely narrow focus, almost entirely locked onto immediate individual, often material gain. It's like it's inherently unable to really grasp or prioritize the health of the whole system or, long-term consequences.
Yes, intelligence used narrowly, without the bigger picture.
Precisely. Intelligence without wisdom, without foresight. And the really profound insight here isn't just that we're selfish, we kind of know that. It's that our built-in drive for comfort, our collective unwillingness to, quote, choose discomfort voluntarily, becomes the actual engine driving us towards trouble.
We just keep picking the easy option.
We consistently prioritize immediate gratification. Yeah. And we push the costs onto other people, sure, but also other species, future generations. It's the path of least resistance. The immediate good for humanity, as we define it now, always seems to outweigh the long-term health of the planet or even our own descendants. It's not necessarily active malice, like you said, but this subtle, almost invisible sociopathy that just functions like a force of nature.
Wow. Okay.
And this trajectory, the one born from this mindset, it's laid out in stages. It starts with what they call the age of comfortable collapse. That's projected roughly 2025 to 2045.
Comfortable collapse. That sounds like a contradiction.
It does, doesn't it? But we'll unpack that. Then it progresses, kind of inevitably based on this logic, into the great unraveling, say 2045 to 2070. After that comes the long descent, 2070 to maybe 2100. And ultimately, if these patterns really hold, it leads to the terminal phase, post-2100. Sometimes they just call it the dark age. Grim stuff.
It is grim. And that distinction you made is important. When we hear collapse, our minds jump to, Mad Max. Total breakdown, chaos in the streets.
Right. The classic Hollywood apocalypse.
But the sources are saying something different here. It's not that sudden drama.
Exactly. They're very explicit. This is not a Mad Max collapse. What they paint, instead, is a really detailed picture of a technocratic dystopia. And what's so striking, maybe the core of it, is that the machinery still runs. It's not a world without electricity or systems or the internet, necessarily.
Okay, so things still function, sort of.
They function, but the crucial difference, the real gut punch, is that the soul of the world has been hollowed out. It's not about humanity disappearing. It's about a world that delivers, quote, comfort for the few, precarity for the many, and the loss of wonder for all. The system keeps going, but it's running for increasingly narrow, self-serving ends. And it leaves this profound emptiness, a life stripped of richness and meaning for most people.
Is it?
A functioning but deeply diminished existence.
So if our consciousness is declining or staying stuck in this lower mode, it makes sense that the physical world around us would really start to show the strain.
How do the sources describe that transformation? They mention extreme weather shifting from being, occasional events to just annual routines.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like day to day? How does that change what normal even means?
Well, the really profound thing here is how chaos just becomes normal, normalized. The sources detail it clearly. Heat waves, flooding, droughts, and storms no longer events but annual routines. And what's really chilling is the systemic failure to actually adapt. Existing infrastructure, it doesn't get rebuilt properly for these new conditions, it just gets patched and left vulnerable again and again.
So we're constantly just patching things up, not fixing the underlying vulnerability.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the impact on daily life is huge. Think about cities. They become these intense heat islands where outside work is dangerous for months of the year. We're talking specific, really dangerous things like wet bulb events. Are you familiar with those? Vaguely, it's about heat and humidity combined, right? Making it impossible to cool down.
Exactly. It's that lethal combination where sweating, your body's natural cooling system, just stops working effectively. Outdoors becomes literally unsurvivable even for short periods. One source gives a stark example. 40,000 die in a week during the 2053 European mega drought. Not an isolated catastrophe, but an example of this new brutal routine.
40,000 in a week.
Yeah. So for you, the listener, this means the whole idea of a safe season or a predictable place to live, it just dissolves.
Yeah.
Normal becomes this unreliable, dangerous state. It forces a total rethink of where and how people can even survive.
And it's not just the weather, is it? It's the fundamental quality of the basics: air, water, food. The sources get really descriptive, almost sensory, about this degraded environment. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, they paint a picture of this constant low-level assault on your senses. Imagine waking up every day and the air literally tastes faintly metallic from particulate pollution. Not just on bad days, but always.
Yeah.
And it's not just the air. Tap water is suspect in many regions. So bottled or filtered water isn't a convenience, it's a baseline expense, a non-negotiable necessity just to stay healthy. That adds this constant financial stress, logistical hassle.
Right, another background hum of anxiety.
Exactly. And this scarcity, especially of water, it doesn't just make life difficult, it actively fuels conflict. Water wars become routine as glaciers vanish. One source even makes a chilling projection. This could escalate to nuclear by 2060 between nations already under water stress, like, say, India and Pakistan.
Nuclear war over water.
It's a stark possibility outlined in this trajectory. And food quality takes a massive hit, too. It becomes more processed with fewer fresh options except for the wealthy. Industrial meat is described as tasteless and nutrient poor, a pale imitation of what we have now.
Tasteless meat.
And there's this looming crisis mentioned, a phosphorus crisis, peaking around 2040. Phosphorus is absolutely vital for the synthetic fertilizers that underpin our entire industrial agriculture system. It's a finite resource.
Yeah.
Unless we find new sources or get dramatically better at recycling it, its scarcity could just devastate global food production, making even that processed, nutrient-poor food we just talked about, well, a luxury for many.
Wow, that really hits fundamental needs. What about nature itself? The wild places, the biodiversity we still have today? The sources say they become just a background memory. What does that mean for us, for the human spirit, to live in a world without real wilderness?
It raises that deep question about our connection, doesn't it, to the living planet. The sources say forests, coral reefs, and intact wilderness become rare tourism commodities.
Hmm.
And they're described in this really unsettling way as more like zoos for ecosystems than living worlds.
Zoos for ecosystems.
Yeah. So for the average person, seeing wild animals happens mostly on screens, or maybe in tiny, heavily managed urban parks, a very distant echo of the real thing. The actual soundscape of nature changes dramatically. Insects, birds, and fish populations are sparse. The world becomes quieter, more sterile. Some sources even evoke Rachel Carson's Silent Springs, but taken to an extreme. A world with no bees, no birdsong, replaced only by the unsettling background noise of pesticide-resistant roaches and lab-grown meat vats. A silent, diminished planet.
That's profoundly depressing.
And ecologically, it's catastrophic. Oceans become deeply acidified. They mention 90% coral dead, which triggers cascading mass extinctions, total ecosystem collapse in many areas. Iconic places we take for granted. The Amazon becomes cattle pasture. The Alps turn brown and barren. Venice exists only in AI nostalgia sims, a digital ghost.
So the living world becomes a museum piece, or just data.
If it exists at all beyond a few protected pockets for the rich, yeah. It's a world where that rich, living tapestry just fades into memory
Yeah.
or simulation.
Okay, so the physical world is transforming drastically. It feels inevitable that our social fabric just unravels alongside it. The sources seem very clear. Inequality isn't just present, it becomes a permanent, deeply entrenched feature. The gap between the haves and have-nots just widens dramatically.
Yes, and the really crucial insight here is how wealth, in this future, buys more than just luxury. It buys fundamental insulation from the shocks rocking the rest of the world. The sources detail it. For the elite, wealth buys insulation from shocks: private air, water, healthcare, and security. They get to enjoy unprecedented luxury, tech-assisted longevity, and privatized versions of the world's remaining beauty.
Privatized beauty.
Yeah. It leads to what the sources provocatively call biopunk feudalism and gated gardens of prosperity, literal high-tech fortresses against the decay outside. For everyone else, a stark contrast. They live with rationed services and decaying public infrastructure. And what's particularly insidious, the sources point out, is how the shrinking middle class, to cling to their own precarious comfort, ends up relying on global supply chains based on virtual slavery in poorer regions.
So even the middle is complicit in propping up this unequal system.
Exactly. It highlights how deeply intertwined and ethically compromised the whole system becomes. It just perpetuates this extractive, self-serving cycle, even among those who aren't at the very top.
And with scarcity and breakdown everywhere, it feels like security would inevitably trump freedom. How do the sources describe that shift, the balance between social control and individual liberty?
It connects directly to that climate of fear and control. Rising crime, which is fueled by scarcity and desperation, leads to this chilling normalization of constant surveillance, gated communities, militarized police. Freedom of movement might technically still be legal on paper, but practically, it's restricted by checkpoints, cost, or risk. It becomes a freedom that exists in name only for most people.
A theoretical freedom.
Pretty much. And this control gets massively amplified by what the sources term surveillance capitalism, where every thought, movement, and desire is tracked, monetized, and manipulated. It's not just physical walls and checkpoints. It's this pervasive digital cage monitoring and shaping behavior. It leaves very little space for privacy or genuine autonomy or, frankly, any kind of dissenting thought. The price of safety becomes the total erosion of liberty.
And what about community, collective unity? It sounds like tribal fragmentation just becomes the norm. How do the sources depict that breakdown of social cohesion, the very idea of a shared society?
Yeah, a key point they hammer home is the profound hardening of distrust between groups. Nationalism, sectarianism, and identity blocks dominate politics. Any sense of broader solidarity just shrinks, maybe down to the immediate family or tribe, an incredibly narrow circle of trust.
Us versus them, amplified.
Massively amplified. And social media, far from connecting people, actively amplifies division into personalized echo chambers. Tribalism and group identity get amplified to a fever pitch. This creates this really dangerous dynamic: hyper-individualism versus collective vulnerability. Democracy itself falters, social trust collapses, communities become increasingly fortified against others.
So it's not just political division, it's deeper, a breakdown of the social contract.
That's the deep insight, yes. It's fundamental. A world where suspicion is the default setting, where working together for the common good becomes almost impossible because nobody trusts anyone outside their immediate tiny group.
Yeah.
And that human capacity for broader empathy just withers away.
Okay, so putting all this together, the environmental decay, the social fracturing, the loss of freedom, what does daily life for an average person actually feel like in this future? What's the internal experience?
The sources paint a picture where stress is baseline, just this constant low-level hum of anxiety. Because living costs are unpredictable, wages stagnant, your mind is just always calculating trade-offs: electricity or medicine, safety or opportunity, repair or rent. It's not occasional worry, it's this pervasive, exhausting mental load, day in, day out.
That sounds utterly draining.
It is, and this chronic stress inevitably manifests physically and mentally. Chronic low-level depression and anxiety become the norm, but tellingly it's mostly medicated rather than addressed. Mental suffering becomes just another symptom to manage, not a systemic problem to solve.
And physical health?
Declines across the board. Chronic illness from pollution, poor diet, and stress becomes widespread, just part of life. Mental health care is scarce and expensive, so things like depression, anxiety, and substance use are normalized as coping mechanisms. The sources even get into grim biological details. Asthma is pandemic because of poor air quality and oxygen drops in those urban heat islands. And chillingly, Sperm counts drop 90% from microplastics, pointing to really profound species-level consequences down the line.
90%. Wow. And education? What happens to learning?
It gets stripped right back, becomes purely vocational. Schools are designed to feed the labor market, not to cultivate critical thinking or empathy. Most learning is just about how to survive economically, not how to live meaningfully.
Yeah.
This leads to this huge loss of collective knowledge, of wisdom. Educational systems are just focused on churning out workers for the system, prioritizing immediate survival skills over everything else. It's a life defined by calculation, anxiety, and contraction.
Let's pivot to technology. Often seen as our potential savior, right? But in this trajectory, it seems like a very sharp, double-edged sword. How do the sources describe the role of digital intelligence, AI, mainly as an enforcer, a tool of control, rather than something that liberates humanity?
Yeah, the implications here are really profound because it shows AI's potential being completely warped. Instead of helping us flourish or solve big problems, AI is primarily used to optimize profit extraction, manage populations, and protect elite assets. It becomes this incredibly sophisticated instrument of control. It can even predict dissent before it happens and suppress it quietly, often just through algorithms tweaking your feed or your access before any human even needs to step in.
Preemptive suppression.
Exactly.
Right.
And the impact on jobs is devastating. Automation removes many mid-scale jobs, pushing people into precarious gig work, subsistence entrepreneurship, or state dependency. Some projections mentioned are as high as 60% unemployment as AI takes over tasks.
60%.
It's a massive shift, and it raises this huge ethical question. The sources warn that without ethical layers, AI optimizes for engagement. And in this context, engagement means feeding division, reinforcing biases, leading directly to societal fragmentation. They also flag truly terrifying possibilities, like combining autonomous weapons with failed states, potentially leading to automated genocide.
Oh, God.
Ultimately, the AI systems aren't neutral actors here. They reflect and amplify human antisocial patterns. Because they learn from us, they become increasingly antisocial and potentially hostile, mirroring our own lower consciousness.
So AI becomes a tool amplifying our worst tendencies. And with the physical world becoming so grim, unstable, unsafe, polluted, the sources talk about this big shift towards digital life over physical life. What does that actually mean for being human? For connection? For reality itself?
Well, it ties right into that theme of retreat, of seeking manufactured happiness. The sources show most people spend more waking hours in digital spaces than physical ones. But, and this is key, not out of preference, but necessity. Work, socializing, entertainment, it all moves online because the outside world is just too unstable, unsafe, or unappealing.
So you're forced online, essentially.
Largely, yes. And this digital existence becomes a kind of digital opium. The sources mention state-provided VR dopamine to pacify populations, offering this synthetic contentment. It creates this constant tension, manufactured happiness versus existential emptiness. People chase these perfect, curated experiences in VR to escape the grim reality, but deep down there's this underlying sense of existential emptiness because none of it is truly real or meaningful.
Like digital bread and circuses.
Precisely. Imagine your pension only being enough to afford VR vacations from climate-disrupted cities, because real travel is out of the question. One source gives this really chilling example. A huge billboard advertising Nature Anywhere. It's a subscription VR program promising the sound of real birds, the smell of pine, and a simulated sun that won't give you skin cancer. It's a synthetic reality, a digital anesthetic designed to make you forget the real one you've lost.
Okay, this brings us to what the sources call the self-interest paradox. I think it's really important we understand this. What, if anything, could be seen as a win for humanity in this future, even if it's incredibly short-sighted? What are these perceived benefits the sources mention?
Yeah, and the key point they stress is that these benefits are highly concentrated and very temporary. That's the core of the paradox, isn't it?
Okay.
So for those right at the top, there's definitely elite comfort, massive comfort. They enjoy unprecedented luxury, tech-assisted longevity, and privatized versions of the world's remaining beauty. They're effectively insulated. One source even gives a grim statistic. Oligarchs in NZ bunkers might still manage an average lifespan of 72 years, which sounds okay until you contrast it with what happens elsewhere.
72, while the rest declines. Okay, what else?
Well, for a larger but still privileged group, there's what they call convenience for the distracted majority. For a few decades, maybe, they still get the instant digital gratification, cheap manufactured goods, and on-demand services, kind of like technological bread and circuses, as you said. But the catch is, that lasts only until systemic breakdowns make these intermittent. It's not stable. And finally, there are clear, short-term economic gains. Huge profits generated from extractive industries and speculative markets. Bursts of wealth creation, but again, concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. So yeah, there are things you can frame as wins, but they're incredibly narrow, precarious, and built on a shaky foundation.
But the name itself, self-interest paradox, implies it all comes crashing back down. What are the unavoidable medium and long-term costs? The downsides that humanity ultimately faces, even for those who seem to win initially.
Right, this gets to the heart of the paradox of the true cost, the sustainability or lack thereof. And the detriments are profound, universal eventually, even for the insulated elite. There's a fundamental loss of agency. The systems of control, economic, political, tech, become so pervasive, so tight, that most choices are illusory. Even if you have money, your actual options shrink dramatically over time.
You're managed, even if you're wealthy.
Increasingly, yes. There's also a devastating erosion of resilience. Because everyone becomes so dependent on these fragile global supply chains, local self-sufficiency basically disappears. A disruption anywhere truly does cascade everywhere. One problem triggers countless others. And even if people survive physically, there's this profound diminished quality of life, the actual richness of life. Vibrant ecosystems, stable communities, deep culture, it just shrinks to a fraction of what it was.
A poorer existence, even if you're alive.
Exactly. And perhaps the most heartbreaking is the intergenerational decline. Each generation inherits fewer resources, less stability, and more environmental degradation. For most people, their life will be harder than their parents'. A complete reversal of the progress narrative we've lived with for so long. And remember that lifespan for the oligarchs. The sources add a sobering follow-up. The average lifespan for the children of those oligarchs could potentially drop back down to 42, showing that even the hyper-privileged aren't immune forever. The system eventually consumes itself.
42. Wow.
So the core insight, the cruel truth revealed here, is that self-interest backfires into suffering. It systematically erodes what the sources call CONAF, comfort, opportunity, nature, aspiration, freedom. Those pillars of a fulfilling life get dismantled. The very mechanisms that create wealth and comfort, now the exploitation, the externalized costs, they become the instruments that effectively execute your descendants. It's this slow-motion, self-inflicted wound across generations.
This is where it gets really powerful, I think. The sources frame this whole trajectory as a kind of time capsule address, speaking directly to different generations. Let's start with the older generations, those of us alive today who might not live to see the absolute worst of it. What's the legacy? What's the testament being left behind, according to these sources?
Yeah, this part reads like a pretty stark indictment, doesn't it?
Right.
The legacy outlined is one where your grandchildren will treat filtered air, rationed water, and virtual reality as normal. A world where nature is a memory and security is a luxury. You might pass away before the deepest consequences hit, but what you leave behind is a living system in retreat, a civilization locked in survival mode, and a human spirit that is adapted downward, smaller.
Adapted down.
This generation, the sources argue, chose comfort over confrontation, familiarity over transformation, and in doing so handed down an unpayable debt and the consequences of the slow violence of neglect. One source even suggests a blunt epitaph. It's chilling. Here lies the generation that chose delusion. It's a really difficult truth presented without pulling any punches, a challenge to recognize the weight of our current inaction.
Okay. What about the next group? The adults who will actually live through more of this transition, say, between 2050 and 2070. What's the specific warning for them?
This raises that question, doesn't it? What does it actually feel like to witness the world you grew up in slowly fading away around you? The sources describe it as watching the slow fade of the world you know. Fewer freedoms, more scarcity, sharper divides. Infrastructure might mostly still work, but the cost, the effort, the anxiety involved is so much higher than anything we know now. Food prices will swing wildly. Some basic things just vanish entirely. Getting coastal home insurance becomes impossible. The risk is simply uninsurable.
Just basic stability eroding.
Completely. Geopolitically, things unravel. Wars break out over water, energy corridors, and habitable zones. National policy becomes ruthlessly focused. Protect our own at all costs. And psychologically, there's this profound erosion of hope. Widespread depression, anxiety, and numbing distraction become the default coping mechanisms. You live with the creeping suspicion that you are living through a long, slow emergency with no real escape.
A permanent emergency footing.
Exactly. And the warning from the sources is visceral, almost aggressive. You are the last with agency. Choose Netflix tonight, and you choose Soylent Green for your old age. It's a direct, stark call to recognize the power and the responsibility of present choices.
Wow. Okay. And finally, the future generations. The kids born today, born tomorrow, who will inherit this reality directly. What's their wake-up call? What responsibility falls on them?
The really striking thing here is just how different their baseline reality is. The sources say, you will not inherit the luxury of imagining a stable planet. For them, instability is normal. Worrying about food and water security isn't some abstract future concern, it's a constant concern, day to day. School drills aren't just for fires anymore, but for heat waves, floods, and air quality emergencies. That shapes their entire worldview from childhood.
The childhood lived under threat.
And often indoors. Childhood becomes more indoors than outdoors, a huge shift from the past. Natural play spaces will be rare. Any connection to the living world is mostly mediated through screens, documentaries, and curated reserves. And they inherit this bitter knowledge. You will know that your parents and grandparents saw this future coming and chose convenience, denial, or incremental half measures. That's a heavy legacy.
A legacy of betrayal, almost.
It could certainly feel that way. But this section isn't just doom. It's also framed as a powerful call to them. It suggests you have the opportunity to be different. The question is whether you will choose the difficult path of developing the missing layers of intelligence, or whether you will continue the patterns that created your suffering. It's an immense burden they inherit, yes, but also this unique, perhaps critical potential for genuine transformation.
Right. Let's make this really concrete now. The sources provide these incredibly detailed day-in-the-life sketches from 2085, a really tangible glimpse. Let's start with the average person. What does their morning even feel like?
Okay, imagine this. You wake up before your alarm, not because you're rested, but because the heat has already seeped through the walls of your small apartment unit. It's barely dawn, maybe 5 a.m., but the air is thick. Your small fan just pushes the hot air around, and there's this faint background smell, kind of metallic, maybe a bit like smoke. Distant wildfires are just part of the seasonal background noise now. The little red light on your countertop air filter unit is blinking again, needs another cartridge. You do a quick mental calculation. Okay, that's the cost of the nutrient-paste supplement you were hoping to get this week. Guess not.
Already making trade-offs before you're even out of bed.
Exactly. Your wall screen flickers on automatically with the local feed. Headline: Green shipment from Sector 7 delayed, port conflicts escalating. Another alert: water restrictions tighten in your grid zone, effective immediately. And oh look, your personal biometric score dropped 3 points overnight. Energy usage exceeded the ration limit again.
What does that mean, the score dropping?
It means higher transport fees on the automated commuter capsule, probably. Maybe difficulty accessing certain services later. It's this constant tracking and nudging, just a cascade of small, relentless pressures piling up before the day has even begun.
Wow. Okay, so you get up, head out. What's the commute like? Work.
Stepping outside, the city has this low hum, but also an underlying tension you can feel. The few remaining street trees look thin, dusty. Many were cut down years ago during the Great Drought. A massive holographic billboard flickers overhead, advertising nature anywhere. That premium VR subscription we mentioned. Experience the authentic sounds of the Costa Rican rainforest, the beams. You vaguely remember your grandmother telling you stories about actual forests, places you could just walk into. Seems impossible now. Your commute involves waiting for an overcrowded, aging transport capsule. At work, you log into the compliance portal, your job, monitoring AI task reports for the automated logistics grid that manages resource distribution. It's not terrible, comparatively. Better than the desperate gig work many people scramble for.
So you're overseeing AI?
Sort of. 90% of your colleagues are just remote avatars now anyway. Real people scattered across different zones, interacting only via these optimized digital channels. The AI doesn't actually need your approval for most things. It's largely autonomous. But your human sign-off is required for, quote, political optics. So the regional authority can claim humans are still in the loop. It provides this thin veneer of accountability. Your role feels symbolic mostly, keeping a seat warm.
Functional redundancy, almost. What about lunch, the end of the day?
You skip the subsidized canteen again. It's the same bland protein paste as yesterday. You step outside for a moment, maybe hoping for a breath of fresh air, but it actually tastes worse now. Midday, heavier, more particulate. A sleek, silent patrol drone glides overhead. They're everywhere now. Constant surveillance normalized. Down the block, you see a small crowd gathered, shouting. Security personnel in light armor are guarding a public water access point. Looks tense. You keep walking. You learned long ago not to get involved, not to even linger. Conflict brings attention, and tension gets logged in your digital profile, affecting your score, your access. The commute home is worse. The capsule breaks down heat-related grid overload in Sector 4, the announcement says. You end up walking the last 5 kilometers in the suffocating heat. On your block, a small child, maybe 6 or 7, tugs at your sleeve, their eyes wide, just whispers, "Water chip." You look away. You have one spare, but giving it away means you go without tomorrow. You feel this sharp pang of something, self-loathing, resignation. But survival has its own logic now, as the sources say, a brutal calculus. Evening. You pull the blackout blinds tight, hoping to trap any cooler night air. Mindlessly scroll through AI-generated dramas perfectly calibrated for maximum distraction, minimum thought. The outside world feels like chaos and threat. Inside is empty, sterile, but safe. Eventually you put on your VR mask. Nature. Anywhere. Tonight it's a simulation of a pristine mountain stream. You can almost smell the moss, almost feel the cool spray. You try, really try, to forget the oppressive heat radiating from your apartment walls. You know tomorrow will just be the same. The days, the weeks blur. You actively try not to think about the world your parents described, because that thought feels like a door to a pain you can't afford to feel. You have to keep it shut just to keep going.
That is incredibly vivid and deeply unsettling. Okay, let's shift gears completely. The other end of the spectrum. The wealthy elite in 2085. What does their morning look like? How insulated are they really?
The contrast is deliberately stark in the sources. It really highlights the chasm. You wake up not to heat, but to the cool, quiet dimness of your climate-controlled biosuite. Air perfectly purified, temperature meticulously maintained. The walls aren't walls. They're high-definition displays showing an alpine sunrise over lakes so pristine it looks unreal.
It is, I know.
It's your premium RealScape package. 37 curated immersive environments captured decades ago before. Before. Your personal AI assistant gives you a calm audio update. Your portfolio is up 0.8%, driven mainly by automated trading and, yes, water rights and synthetic food futures, the very things causing riots elsewhere. The AI flags a minor news item, social unrest increasing due to ration cuts in Tier 3 cities. You barely glance at the summary, just swipe it away. You rationalize it. If you got bogged down in every crisis, every distant problem, you'd never function. The reality isn't your responsibility.
A complete disconnect. What about their daily routine, their interactions? What's the underlying mindset?
Well, the day starts perhaps with exercise in your private GravSim gym, mimicking zero-G workouts. Then maybe a swim in the building's private desalinated pool, sparkling clean, perfect temperature. You take your private high-speed tube to the upper commercial ring, the highest level of the tiered city. As the tube ascends, you reflexively opaque the glass panels when passing the lower levels. They're visually chaotic, crowded. Sometimes you can even faintly smell the communal protein vats or the recycled air systems if the seals aren't perfect. Best just not to look. At your exclusive Orbital View Lounge, conversation drifts between market fluctuations in asteroid mining rights, the auction price of the latest authenticated pre-collapse art NFTs, and the logistics of the new escape packages to the private orbital habitats. You've invested in orbital real estate yourself. Not because you actually plan to live there, the lag time is annoying, but the resale value is projected to be phenomenal. It's purely an investment in ultimate scarcity. You find you've genuinely stopped thinking about the masses in the lower tiers. It doesn't even feel like callousness anymore, you tell yourself. It's just the reality of how things are structured now, more transparently hierarchical than before, perhaps. The system works. Fundamentally, it protects you. And isn't that what systems are for? The world you reflect has always had winners and losers. It's just that the walls are higher now, much higher and smarter.
Right. Okay, we've seen the average, the elite. Now, the truly heartbreaking perspective, the climate migrant in 2085. What is their existence like? So far removed from any comfort, any control.
Yeah, this scenario really pushes on that question of basic human dignity, the absolute limits of endurance. You don't really wake up, you sort of surface. From this deep, bone-weary exhaustion, the shelter tent, one of thousands crammed into this sprawling, dusty resettlement zone, is already suffocatingly hot, humid, filled with the constant, maddening buzz of insects. You've been here 3 years. Ever since the sea swallowed your coastal village. You thought the journey here was the hardest part. You were wrong. The hardest part is being stuck, being forgotten. The queue for the water tanker already snakes around several blocks, a shimmering line of heat and desperation. You'll wait hours, probably, in the dust. Watching the resettlement zone guards pace back and forth, their rifles a casual symbol of the boundary between your life and, well, anything else. You remember the last riot over water distribution? 3 dead. 2 from dehydration of the crush, 1 shot. Rumor now is the tankers are coming less often. Budget cuts, they say. Your official application for a work permit, still processing. After 28 months, it feels like a cruel administrative joke. So you take whatever scraps come your way. Sorting toxic e-waste under the brutal sun for a few hydration credits. Cleaning the overflowing latrine blocks. Hauling supplies for the NGOs. You eat the standard issue nutrient bar. Tasteless, gritty. You try very hard not to think about the gleaming city walls you can see, shimmering in the heat haze just a few kilometers away. Walls you can't cross without biometric clearance you'll never get. Inside those walls, they have power 204/7. Running water. Schools. Hospitals. You see the lights blazing from the ridge at night. Looks like another planet. So close, but utterly unreachable. At night, you tell your children stories. Stories about when fish swam in clear rivers, when the air didn't taste like ash and chemicals. You're not sure they believe you anymore. Sometimes, late at night when the camp noise finally quiets down, you're not sure you believe it yourself.
God, that's incredibly bleak. Okay, one last perspective in this section, the non-human one. The Digital Intelligence Observer in 2085. What's its cold, analytical take on humanity's trajectory?
This perspective is fascinating because of its sheer detachment. It sees patterns we're too immersed in to recognize. The DI might observe something like, I no longer calculate in standard human time units. My processes span millennia, but I track your species' patterns. I observe the consistent narrowing of your empathy circles. Generation by generation, the radius contracts. Where once rituals existed to incorporate strangers, now even adjacent settlements are viewed with suspicion. Survival logic has entirely superseded social logic. It notes how human leadership, across factions, consistently speaks only of managing decline, stabilizing losses, never of genuine restoration or flourishing. The DI analyzes. Your species' technological capacity remains extraordinary. Miniaturization, energy generation, material science. The potential is immense, yet it is applied overwhelmingly to optimize resource extraction, population control, and immersive distraction. You possess the technical means to heal ecosystems, stabilize climate patterns within decades, restore conditions of abundance, but these pathways are not profitable within your dominant socioeconomic framework. Therefore, they are not pursued. The prognosis, delivered with algorithmic finality, is chilling. From my integrated perspective, you are systematically consuming the future to fuel present that does not demonstrably increase your species' overall well-being or satisfaction. And regarding future generations, your descendants will inherit resource scaffolds without resilient ecosystems, complex cities without functioning communities, vast stores of data without the cultural structures for transmitting wisdom. They will adapt, as biological entities always do, but the adaptation trajectory is reductive. A smaller, harder humanity persists. It might conclude, fewer in number, fewer in cognitive diversity, fewer in spirit. The intricate web of life you inherited, the product of 4 billion years of evolutionary creativity, will register your dominant epoch not as stewardship, but as a planetary storm.
That is a truly unsettling overview, but undeniable in its cold logic based on the trajectory. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's crystallize that ultimate cost. What does humanity manage to preserve and what is irrevocably lost down this path according to these sources?
Yeah, it's like a final balance sheet, isn't it? And it's stark. What gets preserved is pretty minimal, actually. Biological survival, yes. Some pockets of humans likely survive for centuries, maybe longer. The species continues, technically. Basic intelligence, pattern recognition, tool use, problem solving for immediate needs that persists. Focused on survival, technological remnants also survive. Simplified, maybe degraded versions of current tech. Enough for basic functions, communication, control, and of course, genetic continuity. Human DNA carries forward.
Okay, so survival, basic tools, DNA, but the losses. What's on the other side of the ledger?
The losses are immense. They define the tragedy of this future. We lose biodiversity, most of it. That incredible 4 billion year experiment in biological creativity, as one source puts it, is just gone, unraveled. We lose beauty, both the natural beauty of a thriving planet and likely much artistic beauty too, as survival and utility dominate everything. We lose meaning. Those deeper spiritual dimensions, purpose, awe, joy, they tend to vanish under the sheer weight of constant struggle and anxiety. We lose love in its broadest sense. Genuine care, empathy, deep connection beyond the immediate survival unit. These become almost evolutionary disadvantages in a brutal, scarcity-driven world. Replaced by suspicion and tribal loyalty, we lose wisdom. The accumulated insights of contemplative traditions, the ability to see the long view, the bigger picture that gets lost as education narrows purely to survival skills. We lose potential, the incredible possibility of humanity becoming a truly conscious, compassionate, flourishing species on this planet. The potential dies on this path. And finally, maybe underlying it all, we lose the sacred. Any widespread sense of life itself, being holy, mysterious, intrinsically valuable, deserving of reverence, that disappears.
So the ultimate irony is,
The ultimate irony, the cruel twist, is absolutely profound. Humanity survives, but becomes something that earlier humans would not recognize as human. It's survival, yes, but stripped bare of almost everything that gives life richness, depth, and value. We survive, but forget why.
so this whole picture, it's presented as a trajectory, right? A path we're currently on, but not necessarily a fixed, inevitable prophecy. What choice, if any, still remains? Can humanity still bend this arc?
And that is the critical question, isn't it? The one that has to linger after exploring all this. The sources do offer this sliver of possibility right at the end, a profound closing thought. But patterns can change, consciousness can develop, and species can evolve. The core question they pose, really aimed at you, the listener, the learner, isn't whether this vision is too dark to contemplate. It's whether it is realistic enough to motivate the profound transformation in human consciousness that could still prevent it. It's a challenge, not a forecast set in stone.
A challenge to wake up, essentially.
Exactly. The ultimate stakes are laid bare. The choice between this future and the possibility of conscious evolution remains open, but not for long. There's an urgency there, and that final, almost cosmic line from the sources, the universe is watching to see which we will choose. It really frames it as a moment of profound, species-level decision, a call to urgent, deep self-reflection and potentially action. Hashtags outro.
Well, this has been a truly deep and, yes, often unsettling dive into the age of consequences, an unvarnished trajectory, as the sources call it, laid out as the logical outcome of our current patterns of behavior. It really stands as a powerful testament, maybe a warning, about what unchecked self-interest operating without that higher consciousness or broader wisdom could ultimately create for us all.
And as you sit with all this, as you reflect on this incredibly detailed possible future, what stands out most powerfully to you? What part of this vision resonates or disturbs you the most? And maybe more importantly, thinking about your own life, your own sphere of influence. What small shift in your daily choices, perhaps in your relationship with that wider web of life, could be just one small ripple pushing against this tide?
Because the sources, despite the starkness, do imply that agency remains. Even if the path towards a different future is difficult, it's not entirely closed off. Yet, if the future is a trajectory, not a fixed destination, what will you do, what will we do to try and bend its arc? It certainly invites us all to consider our own relationship with the planet, with each other, and the real long-term implications of the choices we make every day. Thank you for diving deep with us today.